In the evening, Jacob and Kathy took the bus to Sophie's place as usual. They were both silent the whole ride, though Kathy did inform Jacob that she did talk to her dad, and as expected, it had been of no use, so she would be going to his house from the next weekend. Just like the past 2 days, Helen prepared a fancy dinner, mainly to show Kathy their appreciation. Dracon was sitting on the couch watching the news. On TV, the news of Dracon's $30 million donation to Walter was being broadcasted. Sophie was also on the couch, just scrolling on her phone. "Here you are. We were waiting for you guys for the dinner." When Jacob and Kathy walked into the house, Helen greeted them politely. "Thank you, Helen." Kathy sat at the dinner table, already on the first-name basis with Helen. Dracon and Sophie walked to the table, and Jacob sat beside Sophie. "Today, I'll teach Soph the last bit of the basic cultivation technique," Kathy picked up her spoon and said abruptly. "Really?" Sophie was a little surprised. On the first day, Kathy told her that she would learn the basic cultivation technique in 3 days, but she didn't know that Kathy was being literal. "Well, thank you, Kathy," Helen said with a smile. She knew that for Sophie, who had cultivation experience, the basic cultivation technique of human cultivators wouldn't be difficult. "No problem," Kathy answered with a small smile. She was still trying to navigate her way in the cultivation world. Her master had mostly just given her the technique and left her be. In these uncertain times, Helen had been very kind to her. Dracon and Jacob remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. "From now on, Kathy will be living in my home on the weekends," Jacob said, and broke the silence in the room. Sophie and Helen looked up at him, and Kathy also looked at him in surprise. Only Dracon remained calm, and continued to drink his wine in a casual manner. Jacob awkwardly cleared his throat at the silence. Helen thought for a moment and lowered her head, intently cutting the steak in her plate. Sophie glared at Jacob before looking at Kathy with a betrayed expression. Since no one responded to what Jacob said, she kept silent as well. After dinner, Kathy tutored Sophie in terms of cultivation, teaching her the last details. Kathy felt like a war was brewing, but she didn't want it to affect Sophie's cultivation. After all, any minor mistake would cause great problems in the future. After the long cultivation session, Jacob tutored Sophie for another hour. Sophie didn't speak to either of them the whole time, giving them the silent treatment. When the sessions ended, Jacob and Kathy returned to the first floor to say goodbye to Helen, who was quietly reading in the living room. Helen immediately stood up and walked them to the door. She said politely, "I really appreciate what you did for us, Kathy." "No problem." Kathy nodded slightly. "It's late. Jacob, please go back carefully," Helen said to Jacob. "Okay." Jacob nodded. Jacob knew that she didn't approve of his announcement earlier, but there was nothing he could do about it. Since Snowflake was with Noah, they had to take the bus to the old apartment building where Kathy lived. The night was quiet, and Jacob and Kathy's shadows fell on the uneven ground. It was too quiet to feel safe. "The youth pill. Do you think I should take it or not?" Kathy asked abruptly. She had the pill in her pocket and couldn't decide if she should take it or not. "You should take it at the peak of your health," Jacob said. "But am I at the peak of my health now?" Kathy asked in confusion. She was healthier than ever now, but was this her peak? "I guess so," Jacob answered uncertainly. Kathy put the youth pill back into her pocket before slightly changing her direction and walking to her master's house instead. In the shadows, Kathy stumbled to the door of the shabby house where the old woman lived. Grandma! Grandma! Kathy knocked on the wooden door. Since she was moving to Jacob's home, she wouldn't be able to visit the old woman as often. Besides, she felt like she needed to tell the old woman that she was moving. No sound came from the house for a long while. Instead, the door of the next house creaked open. She moved. Today, her son came here, and they left together after moving 2 boxes of stuff into the car. A middle-aged woman looked at Kathy and Jacob and said. Seeing their astonishment, the woman continued. You're Kathy, right? She gave me a letter with your name on it. Oh. Kathy walked over in a daze. The woman walked back into her home and returned with an old yellow envelope. After handing it to Kathy, she immediately went back to her home, obviously not wanting to get involved with anyone who was close to the weird old woman. Kathy opened the envelope and read it under the dim streetlight immediately. The letter was written with an ink brush. Although it was short, the words were written with force. Everything comes to an end eventually. I have lived on land for over 100 years and have seen all there is to see in the mortal life. You have a good heart, but lack cultivation talent. I'm afraid I won't see you again. The Queen of the North Atlantic is kind, and you can depend on her. Anything could happen on the road of cultivation. If you encounter anyone who try to make trouble, tell them my name, Irene, and they will back off. Kathy folded the letter, and her mind was full of complicated emotions. She had taken care of the old woman for 2 years and didn't know about her real identity until recently. However, the woman probably had watched her go from high school to university. Their master-disciple relationship only established for a couple of weeks, but Kathy felt closer to her than any of her family members. Let's go, Kathy. Jacob nudged her lightly. He was surprised by the old woman's sudden move, but he knew that masters like her didn't want people to know about their whereabouts. He guessed that Noah wouldn't be able to meet Kathy's master after all. Okay. Kathy put away the letter before walking to her apartment slowly. After opening the slightly rusty iron gate of the building and climbing up the stairs, Kathy dug out the key and opened the door. Jacob had been here once and was not strange to this place. However, he came here in the daytime. Now, the small apartment was quiet and dim despite the lights. Jacob felt sad for Kathy as she was truly left alone now. First, her family left, and now the old woman who kept her company had also left. He started feeling better about the idea of her staying with his family. Pack up some of your stuff for now. We can return for more later. Jacob looked around the dim room and said to Kathy. Okay. Nodding, she went into her room to pack some books and clothes. Jacob waited for her in the living room, looking around the small apartment. Okay, let's go. Kathy walked out of her room with 2 bags in her hands. Jacob walked forward and took them from her hands before going downstairs with her. They didn't speak, and their steps resonated in the stairway. It was midnight, so they took a taxi to Jacob's home. In the taxi, Kathy remained silent. She took out the old woman's letter and read it again and again carefully. The woman's handwriting was better than any of the calligrapher artists, and her short letter seemed to have many hidden messages. Irene. So her name is Irene. Kathy put the letter back into the envelope before putting it into her pocket.